husband Elimelech. And now she wants to sell that land. It's up for sale. And you have the first right to redeem it. If you want to buy it, if you have the price, if you're willing to buy it and pay for it, if you're willing to redeem it, then say so. If you don't, I will, Boaz says. The man said, oh yes sir, I'll redeem it. He saw a chance to get a nice piece of land. And Boaz now very cleverly has kept this part of it secret until now. Then he says, now, there's one thing you need to know. When you redeem Naomi's land, you also have to redeem the widow of Elimelech's son, Mahlon. You have to redeem Ruth. And he said, oh, wait a minute. No, I can't do that. I can't redeem Ruth. I have a wife of my own, and I have children that are going to inherit what I have. And if I pay the price for this land of Naomi's that she's selling, then he said, that will diminish my finances. And he said, I just can't do it. I won't do it. I can't do it. Now this nearer kinsman, who is he? His name is not given, and there's a good reason. I believe this nearer kinsman is a picture of the law, the Mosaic law. And the Mosaic law cannot redeem. This kinsman said, I can't redeem it. I'd like to, but I cannot redeem it. The law cannot redeem. The law cannot save. It can only condemn. It can only show us that we need salvation. Ruth had the problem. She comes as a Moabitess into Israel, and she is condemned by the law. God had issued a law that no Moabite could enter the congregation of Israel. The law of God shut her out, but grace took her in. In Deuteronomy 23 and verse 3, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. But you'll notice that the word Ammonite and the word Moabite are masculine terms. That is, the men cannot come in, but the women could. They could come in by marrying another Jew. So the law shut her out as it would shut us out. And grace brought her in as grace will bring us in. So the kinsman said in verse 6, I cannot redeem it, lest I mar my own inheritance. Now what does he mean, lest I mar my own inheritance? Well, he meant his own children. But here, the law means he would have to let down the strict commandments of the law. He'd have to lower the standards of the law if the law could redeem. The law cannot lower its standards. People say, well, I've kept some of the law. That's not good enough. To be saved by the law, you've got to keep all the law. All 10 commandments. And all of the law. And nobody has ever done that. Jesus is the only person who ever kept all the law. So the law cannot save. And 2 Corinthians 3:7 tells us that it does not give life. Life comes from God. But if the ministration of death, that's the law. It's not a ministration of life, it's a ministration of death. All the law can do is slay you. Paul said, I had not known sin, but that the law had said, thou shalt not covet. And he said, it slew me. It brought me down to my face and made me see that I was a sinner. If it was glorious, so the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. Now in verse 7, when he said, I will not redeem Ruth, Boaz, you are next in line. If you want a redeemer, you go right ahead. I will not redeem her. Now the law in Israel was that if a man refused the redemption, then the woman was to go up to him, spit in his face, and remove his shoe. And that was a symbol of disgrace. To have his shoe removed is to disgrace him. And he would be known thereafter as the man who plucked off his shoe. In other words, everybody would look upon him. Oh, he refused the redemption. He's the man that plucked off his shoe. Let me read that in verse 7. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe. That made it legal. And gave it to his neighbor. And this was a testimony in Israel. Verse 8. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. Now, handing over the sandal is symbolical of handing over the right of redemption, which he did. Romans 8:3, for what the law could not do. Notice the language. Here he says, I cannot redeem it. Here it says the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. God sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin condemned sin in the flesh. Do you know what that says about the law? When this nearer kinsman redeemer plucked off his shoe, picturing the law, you know what it was saying? The law is barefooted. The law has lost his shoe. He cannot redeem. And yet millions of people still believe they can be saved by keeping the law. The law is barefoot, my friends. His shoe has been plucked off. He has told us that He cannot redeem us. Through the weakness of the flesh, none can keep the law. In John 1:27, there's an interesting little thing that took place. You remember in John 1:27, John the Baptist said, He it is who's coming after me is preferred before me, whose shoe latchet I am not worthy to unloose. Now most people read that and think that that is an example of John's humility. That is not what that means. You know what John was saying? They had been asking him, Are you the Messiah? And he said, No, I am not the Messiah. And he said, the one who's coming after me, Jesus, is the Messiah. And He is preferred before me. Even though John was older than Jesus by 6 months, according to the flesh. He said, I am not worthy to unloose His shoelaces. I cannot remove His sandal. I cannot stand in the place of a Redeemer. I am not the Christ. The meaning is I cannot stand in the shoe, for I am not the Redeemer. If I was the Redeemer, I would stand in His shoe. But I'm not the Redeemer. I cannot stand in His shoe. Now this book is full of divine providence. It's a book of divine providence. You'll notice that in the previous chapters it said her hat was to lie on the field of Boaz. That does not mean it was an accident. God divinely directed Ruth to the field of Boaz. She couldn't have gone anywhere else that day. She could not have gleaned and gotten a yield of grain in any other place but Boaz. Seemingly accidental things display His providence. I'll give you an illustration. On March the 1st, 1950, in Beatrice, Nebraska, the pastor went to church that Saturday afternoon to prepare for the evening choir practice. Most choir members would arrive between 7:15 and 7:30 p.m. He then went home for a quick supper, was ready to return with his wife and daughter, when it was discovered that the daughter's dress was soiled and needed a change, which in turn first must be ironed. High school sophomore LaDonna had trouble with her geometry problems and had to stay to finish the problem. Usually she would be always early for the rehearsal. There were two sisters ready to go to church, but their car would not start. They called up the geometry girl to come and pick them up. Mrs. Schuster had a small daughter who would normally arrive at 7:20. But that night, her old mother needed her, and so she dropped by her mother's. A lathe operator wanted to stop putting off an important letter. I don't know why, and he was late. Stenographer Joyce Black, feeling just plain lazy, stayed until the last possible minute. Then she was ready to go when it happened. Machinist Harry Old was going to take two boys to choir practice since his wife was away, but somehow started talking with someone, and when he looked at his watch, he was already too late. Pianist Marilyn Paul decided to come 1/2 hour earlier, but after supper she fell asleep and barely arrived on time. Choir director and mother of the pianist, Mrs. Paul, was late due to her daughter. She tried unsuccessfully to wake her up before. Two high school girls usually go together, but one was listening to the 7:30 radio program, and that evening broke their usual habit of promptness in order to listen to the end. At 7:25, the West Side Baptist Church blew up. Its roof crushed in and its walls fell down due to leaking gas. But the choir members were all late, and this had never happened before. These choir members had never been late before to choir practice. This was the first time that any of them was ever late. And something intervened with every one of these choir members to keep them from coming to church on time. For if they had all been there on time, they would have been caught in the explosion of the building. As it was, there was nobody in the building. Now, if that is not the providence of God, I just don't know what you'd call it. The circumstance were such that if you were to mathematically try to reason it out, it would be so many zeros behind a 1, you'd never be able to end the zeros. The mathematical chance of all of that happening to all of those people at that particular time when it had never happened before is astronomical. Another illustration comes to my mind. The only survivor of a shipwreck was washed up on a small uninhabited island. He prayed for rescue, and every day he scanned the horizon, hoping a ship would come by and pick him up. Finally, no help seemed to be coming. So he built a little grass hut, and he stored a few meager possessions in that little grass hut. And as he was out foraging for food one day, he came back, and to his amazement, his little hut was on fire. And in exasperation, he cried out, "Oh God, why did you do that to me? My only shelter you have burned up, and nobody has come to rescue me. Why did you burn up my hut?" About an hour later, he saw a ship come by and stop out on the horizon. A little skiff with some men in it. Got in the skiff and came to the shore. He ran down to the shore and he said, "How did you know that I was here?" They said, "Oh, we saw your smoke signal." That's the providence of God. You couldn't explain it any other way. The will of God, including the providence of God, is finding a marriage partner. It is no accident